The first poem I'm going to read is called I Want to Be a Glorious Writer. I want to be a glorious writer, just like my father before me. But was that writer really my father? Was that me, alone for years, alone in the lightless basement, adrift amid the dark stars? I had no picture books, nor light by which to read them, but I imagined the book, the idea of the book, and now I want to write one. This poem is called A Buyer's Market. A buyer's market. The key to truth is inward reflection. Do you buy that? Sounds like a good deal, and maybe it is, but think it over. Consider the terms. For instance, if inward reflection is inarticulable, then truth is going to be indemonstrable, and you may or may not want that. Don't be in a rush. Buyers are legion. You're just one customer in a potential stampede. Quite true, but sellers outnumber buyers by an order of magnitude. It is, in other words, a buyer's market. So take your time. Maybe you're not in the market for truth. Maybe you're inclining toward meaning. Fine, but don't be dazzled by every pitch that comes along. It would be nice if meaning adhered like a trace mineral in anything you happen to care about, but what about the idea that meaning is a precipitate of the search for truth? What if these metaphors implicate you too deeply in the material world? Aren't you in the market for something less palpable, more conceptual? Think it over. Wait and see, because again, there's no rush. It's a buyer's market. Do you buy that? If not, what are you selling? The next poem is called Tanager. There are various kinds of tanagers, but this is about the kind that's in this part of the world that's red with black wings. It's a beautiful bird, but hardly ever seen, and I can remember the very few times that I've ever seen a tanager, a scarlet tanager. Tanager. Some say the earth is flat. Others say it's round. The truth, of course, is somewhere in between. As I am of two minds, molten or frozen, or so I imagine, though I know that in practical fact, I am somewhere in between, lost in the fog of war, the haze of peace, the spotlight of ongoing negotiations. And the tanager that hides in the silent talking point that makes itself heard is the vibrant boredom of this day in summer, adrift in the moment, anchored in my memory, even as the devilish crossroads refuse to be remembered clearly or forgotten entirely. They want to play hide and seek right out in the open, as if the angels of our better nature were those elusive oodles of gnats, sun-struck and luminous, but far from the glory of heaven. Because heaven is unimaginable, we can only glamorize it, much as we glamorize our indecision, chisel in hand. And sooner than you might think, there will be a statue at the crossroads, anchoring it to the afternoon with a marble homage to a certainty too grand to call our own. It belongs to the heavens, to their expats, to the flatness of the earth. Or is it round? The earth, I mean. Or do I mean the flatness of the voice that announces the judge's decision? We live in the real world, which is home as well to any number of make-believe worlds. The one, for example, proposed by this poem, which is, for the moment, my reality, not to mention yours if you've been paying attention. And so the really real world is neither the real world nor some make-believe world, but yet another world somewhere in between. Or so we might, in the midst of our disagreements, agree for the moment to believe. This is called Your Story. If you want me to read your story, make sure that it conveys a sense of exile, of displacement or alienation, or tries to convince me that homesickness, literal or metaphorical, is a condition of contemporary life, dimly remembered, or sends its leading protagonist in search of a secret past, vividly hallucinated, or on a quest for a lost family member or pet or childhood friend, real or imaginary, literal or metaphorical, or burrows into the realm of memory for the truth of an early trauma, vividly hallucinated or dimly remembered, literal or metaphorical, or zeroes in on a solitary figure, real or imaginary, suffering some sort of confinement, metaphorical or literal, vividly hallucinated or dimly remembered, or voices desperate rage and horror at the violent stupidities and barbarities of world affairs, dimly remembered or vividly hallucinated, literal or imaginary, or fills the narrative stage with narrators whose improvised asides will help me understand at long last what it is for any theme of any story whatsoever to be real or imaginary, literal or metaphorical, dimly remembered or vividly hallucinated. This is called Suggestions of Light. Suggestions of light prompt ruminations on weather. Do not try to paint before mastering this truth. By the same token, it might be good not to master this truth until you have painted for 20 years or so. Spooked, you wonder if the fearlessly sexy is just happenstance, an aesthetic of artlessness for art to transcend. You wonder if you are all that happenstance was ever waiting for, was always looking for, can no longer do without. If only you could convince yourself one way or the other, you and the universe could settle your differences. You would know yourself for what you are, and you would be free to think of things other than yourself, like those who live in the beautiful house, who never fuss about how beautiful it is. They live too close to it. All they ever do is get in one another's hair. Silvery patches wrinkle and re-wrinkle the colorless air. The world's most exemplary fact is the muteness of the word upon the page. What you call motive, or some other character might call the god from the machine, deus ex machina, as they used to say. Les flics were checking people's papers as if they really meant it. I wouldn't let it upset me. You let things upset you and, hey, sweetheart, don't listen to me. I just talk to stay in practice. This is called The Poem is Trying to Tell Me Something. The poem is trying to tell me something about originality, the fruit, I think it is saying, in a language not entirely known to me, not of subverting our perennial faiths, but inspiring memory to crash, pulverizing everything that went before. I'm not on board with this, nor with nautical imagery in general. I do not want to stand barefoot upon the liquefying deck, nor do I yearn to be one of the circling seabirds, creatures nicely adapted to their environment, no doubt. Yet, what do they care if I forget the poems I memorized? What do those poems care, or poetry itself? What if my stubbornness is my originality? And what if I repeat myself from now until kingdom come? What's it to you? Not that I will ever forget William Collins's Ode to Evening. Well, in fact, I remember only bits and pieces of it, fragments looming up from the foggy glory of the aggregate, each a monument to a sensibility, whose I'm not sure. And the same goes for Paradise Lost. I wonder if anyone ever memorized the whole thing. Anyway, some praise the poet, some praise the words upon the page. It makes no difference, not in the long run. That is all you know or need to know, and if you believe that, you'll believe anything, to quote the Duke of Wellington. This is called voiceover, as in a lot of film noir movies. Voiceover. A painter paints a wall, a house painter that is. The wall is unconnected to any other wall, it turns out, which means the paint defines the wall as a luminous crust, and the house painter is a painter, neither more nor less, and the house in which the painting will hang is not yet built, or not necessarily, or you have sold the house to buy your way into a plot that will make its tenuous sense only if your voice can lean far enough out the window to signal a willingness to be the voice-over, sole inhabitant of the abandoned house, abandoned even after the new people move in, and turning a new corner in the old maze, come face to face with none other than themselves, ensconced in the melancholy glitter of the breakfast nook. Wheaties or Wheatina? Who's asking? You would like to make up your mind, but monochrome or monogamy? Dusk, having fallen, limps away down the hall. That's right, run away. Just what I figured you would do. Artist my foot. I should have left you where I found you, hanging screen doors in Evansville, Indiana. Excuse me. This one is called Parataxis Dreams. Parataxis is a rhetorical figure or structure. It's just one thing after another, like X and Y and Z. You might think it odd that the ancient rhetoricians came up for a name for this, but that was such an unusual structure in Greek and Roman prose that usually it was much fancier than that. But sometimes the sense would just be X plus Y plus Z, or X and Y and Z. And they call that parataxis. Parataxis dreams that life might one day turn out to be a toy train at the scale of the universe with no end to adding new cars. And if most are empty, well, so what? It's just a toy train, a childish thing I will never put away, because how could I ever know how? Knowledge is partial. Prophecy is erroneous by nature, and so how could I ever know when the train will arrive? How could I ever know where it is going? These are childish questions I will never stop asking any more than parataxis will ever rest. Because even if it does nothing, the gravel driveway will lead to something other than itself. Everything will do likewise. The train that bore us from the storybook to this moment, that train will never stop running. This is called normal science. Normal science is a phrase that Thomas Kuhn, the historian of science, came up with to characterize sort of everyday science that people do year in, year out, and then suddenly there's a revolution. And that's, I guess, abnormal science. Anyway, when something really big happens, like the theory of relativity, or before that, Newton's theory of gravity and so on, that just breaks everything wide open, and normal science has to completely realign itself. Normal science of the known world, how little the learning curve has ever learned. The listening area listens but hears next to nothing. Sometimes we blame ideology. That, we say, is what it is for. We say this in dreams of the startling, illuminated kind that go dark in daylight. Yet we know the dream happened. We know what it meant, or all that it can mean in daylight at night before we sleep. Yet we can't shake off our ideologies. Help us, science. Help us find the findings we lost. They mean everything to us. Without them, The right-angled enclosure cannot hold. The outlier cannot be king of the castle. Without them, the raven is all symbol, not at all bird, intelligent and intelligible. The bird population dwindles. Bees buzz much less than before. Help us, science, but science doesn't help, can't even formulate the problem. It is normal science. Ideology is a factor it factors out, or would if it ever found that its findings, too, are ideological, that its learning curve is flat, its raven is deaf, and the area he patrols grows larger by the dreamless day. Uprooted language has evolved a new way of life. Living on air, it emulates the spider plant, as certain moths emulate the bark of the trees where they park themselves until nightfall. They love the darkness, and loving it too much, they seek the light. Not to overindulge a good thing, they believe, improves one's character. Like Aristotle, you see, preaching to his students in the ages, the moths preach moderation not only to themselves, but to the darkness. The darkness has resented the light ever since the first instant of Genesis. Until then, says darkness, my empire was boundless, lacking borders that could not be invaded, and within my borderless realm my authority was absolute, unchallenged, and unchallengeable. Yeah, say the moths. You should get over it. You should, as sleepwalking Americans said about the Vietnam War, put it behind you. Oh, come on, says darkness. Think about it. Behind me, in front of me, all around me, is only more of me, darkness, except for transient incidents of light, challenges that never last longer than a day. Some days are long, say the moths. Darkness says nothing. Living on air, not like the spider plant, but like the house that has fallen into ruin, it has hypnotized itself. And when the darkness comes out of its trance, it will crow like a rooster, and remember, none of this. Okay, the last poem I'd like to read is called There Was Nothing. There was nothing I had not yet said, and if I continued to talk, it may well have been in answer to the silence masquerading as thunder, distant but always apropos of the sunlight, falling like wintry confetti, warming the mottled stone in celebration of its indifference to common sense. Caught up in this spectacle, I neglected the dignity of my being and even my chance to vote for the amendments that might have protected it. So it is to you, constitutional progress. So it is to you, constitutional process, that I offer this last full measure of my devotion. And I am prepared to wait forever, here in the darkness generated with increasing efficiency by your ongoing breakdown, for you to accept this offer of mine, heartfelt and only on occasion, utterly hopeless.